Melissa was going to be absent, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Highest student achievement, we don't have any items. Safe and welcoming learning environment, we don't have any. The first item under effective and efficient systems, review the draft of the 23-24 school calendar. Matt?
So this calendar is one that discussions began in November, I'd say, at the ISD. We've had some discussions there about some changes, but nothing substantive represented here. You were at the ISD 319 and 318 collaborative meeting as well as I was, and I think there's a need and opportunity to talk about this in the future. It's kind of one of the themes that I wrote down, calendar and bell schedule. Don't know that, we're ready to make whole-scale changes right now. In the Facebook Live, I mentioned today, what governs, in addition to our contracts, what governs our calendar a little bit are the law requiring us to start after Labor Day, as well as instructional hour minimums that we have to hit for kindergarten, elementary kids, and secondary kids. And just for perspective, we don't hit that, we have to make up time. So I mentioned today on the Facebook piece, but with our high school now, if we miss another day because of weather, we'll be probably making it up. That's where we're at. So the elementary, we wouldn't need to because the number of hours is less there, but we probably would just run school the whole day. This calendar is really a year-over-year map from the current year that we're in. Very few changes. Our goal at the ISD level is to keep as many student days as we can consistent because of the sharing that we do. It's challenging because our calendars range from 183 teacher days to 180. I think, yeah, we have an 181 in there, a couple 180s. And so those show up with schools having an extra teacher day, like Martin Luther King Day this week. I think there was at least one school that had that as a teacher workshop day to get to where they need to be. We had discussion around the winter break length. That always is a question. A lot of motivation around getting out as early as we can. Questions about the calendar or the spring break come up. I have mentioned that in my Q&A with Carol too, that, there's a couple consistent things that happen there. One is you never pick the week that everybody can agree on because nobody can agree on a week in the spring for spring break. That's disruptive to teachers as they're getting ready for assessments. If you do pick the wrong week, people take their own week-long vacation anyway, so then you got kids that are missing. And it almost invariably messes with the activity schedule. So it's just not great. It's not easy to do. Half the people want it, half don't, and then half that do can't agree on when they would want it.
So this calendar is the calendar that's under review by all of the ISD schools at this point?
Yep, with only slight variations due to their individual contracts. And this did come to meet and confer with the teacher group. We're obligated according to their contract to do that. And, there really wasn't a lot of feedback there. Eric Northern has been doing this a long time, and he knows the boxes that we're sort of living within, and the others kind of saying we didn't really get any feedback. I think there might have been an early draft that had us going to school on the 22nd, I think, Julie, and then staying through the 2nd. And that was one of the things that I think came out of that group. They suggested we move that to that Friday. Same break length, obviously, but just moving to that Friday so people could get out of town or get ready for the weekend. So we responded to that and the group was agreeable to that.
So Matt, I appreciate the IAS piece of it, but just going back to the 318, 319 school board collaborative meeting we had is, do we need to build anything in just for us and Nashrock to sit down and have time for our staff? Whether it's a day and whether it's a half a day, whether it's 2 days, whatever, to talk about whatever needs to be talked about, even though there hasn't been a decision on what we're going to do collaboratively or how much we're going to do collaboratively. I just, listening to everybody, they talked about time and having time to come together and have further discussion or have time to do whatever it is that we don't know yet what we're going to do. So I don't, does it make sense to maybe get together with Nashrock and see what they're thinking and plug a day or two in here? And again, I realize there's probably costs associated with that, but we're going to make a move at some point in time to push this down the road further if we're serious about trying to create those opportunities.
It's certainly an option. I'm not sure, it would, a big part of it would depend on our readiness for those conversations. If we were gonna add another white box somewhere, which is essentially what it would need to be, we would need to remove a white box somewhere or add or cut down on a student day. The one possibility for that very thing could be November 16th. And I bring that up because it's already boxed off white. The high school's been talking about wanting to do conferences differently, and that's really where, we characterize that conversation. Most of that dialogue was high school kind of related stuff. They've been talking about doing high school conferences differently. And, I talked to Andy Forbort last week. He's kind of been leading that up there. I told him that if we were going to do something, different that affected other schools, our district, we would need to kind of have some firm plans about that. I don't think they're ready to jump at that yet, but it could be something that really could take place even on a pilot basis, and we could potentially use that 16th for something like that. Because there's a group of teachers at the high school, based on what Andy told me, that are like, we just as soon have kids at school because the conferences are just not that useful. And so one of the things they've talked about proposing, because all the teachers in the district get the 17th off as a comp day for conferences that are held in the evenings. The high school could still get that, but they could do their conferences, if you will, over time with connecting with parents in off hours, 5-10 minutes, increasing parent engagement essentially. But then we could potentially use that 16th.
Well, I don't want to make time a barrier for the discussions. And I don't know, maybe it was just me. I thought that was loud and clear amongst just about everybody that spoke about having time to do a further dive into things. And again, if Nashrock Keewatin is not on the same page with us, it doesn't make sense to do what you're saying. But is it possible to maybe have that day fluid enough if Nashrock and Keewatin is willing to do that, and whatever
I think we could keep that day in play. It wouldn't affect what the elementary teachers are doing that day. It wouldn't be affected by high school teachers doing something different at all.
There's also the fall break in October, which wouldn't screw up the calendar, but that.
It's interesting you bring that up because, it used to be that MEA break was really sort of like, don't you dare. And
Yeah.
It's less don't you dare now than it ever has been. And I think whether that's an acknowledgement that nobody's really using that for MEA and driving to the cities and going to the conference, or if it's just kind of a recognition that the fall's really
Mhm.
chopped up, and or if there's a recognition that that black might be better off used somewhere else. I don't know what it is, or a combination of those, but there's been more willingness to talk about that than ever.
That's opening festive too.
Well, and now there's a youth deer season during that MEA break. That doesn't help.
Oh, I didn't know. Not being a deer hunter, but we used to go down to my wife's farm and I'd hunt by myself.
Are the 3 workshop days in August, at the end of August, are those 3 full days?
There are 3 full days, and we used to only have 2, and the third white box was on multi-district day. That's where that showed up, and when we stopped doing that, that's where it went. Those are 3 busy days. I think we could use 5 days if we had them. There's a lot of meetings that we try to get done, training that we try to get
Yeah.
done. Yeah, I wish we had a whole week of days.
Matt, do you want to just remind everybody how we set graduation dates?
Yeah, so Big Fork graduation is on a Saturday. Grand Rapids High School is Friday night. With Memorial Day, we kind of have to work around that, and when the end of school is, we had, I think, my first year here, we had quite a break between the end of school and graduation, and it ended up being problematic. So the idea is to get kind of keep that day as connected to the school calendar as we can when kids are still around and before they take off and all that stuff. So, part of that too is there's a regional piece to that where our districts, at least in the county, sort of have graduation at different times to accommodate different families. I think Greenway runs on Saturday, Deer River runs on Sunday. We run on Friday night here in town. So where there's kind of overlap, there's some of that I think's been around a long time. I brought up changing Deer Rivers once, and it was like that sacred cow was alive and
Do
well.
not.
So I don't know, Mark, if there's anything else to.
No, that's, yeah.
And that typically when we've been able to do that, have had graduation practice that last day of school for the seniors when they're around.
Yeah, I'm just glad that everyone's stopping on the same day now, because that's what the gap was, is that the seniors got out, the other kids
Yeah.
kept going.
Yeah. I think it was one of those things where there was some rationale behind doing that and some rationale for not. And I think it became one of those things that became harder to manage
Yeah.
over time.
Well, I mean, those kids, 11th, 10th, 11th, 12th, they share classes, and then the teachers have to be all wrapped up
Yeah.
by the time the seniors are done. So then the kids don't do anything.
Yeah.
That was my kids anyway.
It's really difficult to have a gap with no school and then graduation a couple days later.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that just logistically becomes,
Yeah.
you're trying to get your choir and band in, those kids
Right.
don't have school. And
Yeah.
So if we didn't add a day or 2 in for the collaborative work with Nashrock, what's another option there? Is there another option to bring people together? Is it on one of the days that there is no school and you pay them to come to school to do that?
I mean,
work, or-
it would be that, it would be paying them their daily rate to come in, probably. I think one of the things that we're bound by right now, there's language in our contracts that limit what we can do on end of the quarter days and end of semester days, and that language has to change, in my opinion. Like right now, we can only have 1 hour on next Monday to do anything district. And honest teachers will tell you that, I mean, the grades are in. The elementary teachers don't even grade on the same schedule, but it's a grading day. I mean, so that has to change. That's not a solution. But
So if we brought all staff in for one extra day, what's the cost of the district for that? Any idea? Roughly?
Deer in the headlight.
I feel like we did that in Deer River once, and it was between 15 and 20,000. So multiply that by 4. Be like
Big chunk of
ballpark.
Yeah.
I thought the conversation with Nashwauk was not about a day to do this, but on an ongoing basis, like once a week, we would have a block schedule, an extended schedule. That was my understanding of that conversation. Did I miss
There was
that?
that conversation too, yeah, block scheduling. My take on it is time, just finding time where we
Yeah.
come together. Whether it's a day, whether it's half a day, or whether it's an hour, whatever.
Yeah. And just so the board's aware, the block schedule on the surface would really be helpful for some of these classes, especially that are very lab and hands-on oriented.
Technical.
The challenge with the block schedule that people that
Money.
have implemented will tell you that 2 things. One is financial. It costs more because 25% of your staff aren't teaching at any one given time. They're on prep. And there's really no way to fudge that. With the 7-period day, you'll have districts like Greenway that bought their way into having 6 class teachers teach 6 and have 1 prep. You're squeezing the blood out of the tournament if you can do that. Or you have agreements where you are paying teachers a little bit extra to do that. But I think in just along the county here, I'll tell you, in Deer River, there's like a small little cheap stipend for teachers picking up that 6th hour. In Greenway, they have to do it. In Nashwauk, it's prorated, so picking up that 6th hour, and I'm talking high school again, it's prorated, so that 6th hour might cost you $15,000-$20,000 for that section. And here, it's interesting. It doesn't cost us anything extra if the teachers agree to it. So it's a little in between, but back to the block schedule, it's more expensive. And then second, there's a pedagogy shift that teachers have to undergo, because what ends up happening is you have to get, so what was a semester class all of a sudden becomes a quarter class, for instance. So your time is half in terms of days that you see a kid, but the amount of time and minutes you have is even less than that. It's not double, right? So the blocks are like 80 to 90 minutes long usually, rather than if you're going to double our 50-minute class now, instead of 100 minutes, they're 85. We lost 15 minutes every day for 40-some days. So you've lost 600 minutes or 10 hours, So it's not that it can't be done, because there's some efficiencies you pick up by not having all these transitions too, right? But teachers have to get trained on how to do it. And what you don't want it to be is like, back when I first started, we made a shift to the block, and what it kind of turned into is, instead of the teacher doing section 5.1 today and 5.2 tomorrow, they did 5.1 and 5.2 today in the block schedule. Well, on paper, that's what it should look like, but in reality, it needs to be more sophisticated than that. So, but I think it would serve what we're trying to do better. We're sharing some of this stuff. And it may not be all or nothing. It might be some hybrid of the two, right?
But that block scheduling is primarily secondary.
Yep. And it could be, if we were running, if we were running a vocational center, for instance, we could run a block schedule just in that location. If that was helpful, useful, since those are the classes especially that seem to really benefit from that longer time period, and it would reduce travel.
I think there's a lot that needs to be worked out. I just don't want us to lock into a schedule today that's going to preclude possibilities for the future.
I think any changes that we would make to the Bell schedule would require quite a bit of study. It would take us a year to figure that out. And we'd also need to engage the other ISD folks in that too, because we'd be disrupting something that we worked really hard to put together and that they could probably benefit from too.
Any other discussion? Move on to the next item. Review results of the MSBA School Board self-evaluation. In your package, you have a copy of our results. Probably a good chance to kind of look at how we did this year and compare it to previous years. I think Julie also put the school board goals in here just in case we wanted to compare what we see with what our goals are. Anyone have comments about what they see?
Advocacy and communications seems to be our weakest link to date as we evaluate ourselves.
It was interesting to me that in standard 4 and 5, and actually standard 3, we ended up with, we must have had a couple never answers in the survey. And when I looked at the standards, I was a little surprised, like, I mean, are there things that we're never doing that impact those standards? I kind of racked my brain and was not able to come up with what they might be. The little red dots or bars.
With how small that is, I think that's a fluke in MSBA. Because you can't have 6 people. So that's,
Yeah.
There's something mathematical there that seems off.
yeah,
Like if is it the rounding, like if it's rounding the other areas, that might be like just the rounding error of the other ones.
that's what I'm thinking.
That would make sense, wouldn't it?
Because if 7 people took it, because I take it too, 100 divided by 7 should be basically
15.
what each of our votes should be, right? Like
Yeah.
15.
15%.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that
So
doesn't make
are there
sense.
other votes that go into the soup in this? Or is it just us?
Just our 7.
Wow, we should ask questions then, because that really is dicey. Even those 6% are not right.
I thought it was interesting that our always response has steadily increased over the last 4 years.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think that shows real good progress. More
The
greens, and,
yellow's getting smaller. And
more greens and blues.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I thought was interesting about that communication one, to be honest with you, is that we lost a communication coordinator in there, and it's not
Yes.
reflected in this data. I would have expected to see, that show up somehow, but it didn't.
Yeah.
Well, it may have shown up in the, we progressed so much across the board, except in that area.
Do you hear any comments out of the community about not having a communication director or? um,
I think, to be really honest with you, I think the key things that she helped move along, we've picked up internally. Julie's picked up some, Melanie's picked up some, I picked up some. I think there are things that we probably needed to do when she was here that we still need to do. I think, so it was definitely simpler when she was here. I mean, Julie dropped whatever she was doing and came and filmed the Facebook Live today, ran the iPad and the camera and all that business.
With the help of Melanie too.
With the help of Melanie, yep.
Yeah.
I was working off a script I wrote that didn't have any kind of pre-writing by Jessica, So we picked up some of that stuff, but I think there's some things that we still, our newsletters are going out. But I think there's some other things that we still need to do that weren't doing then that we need to do. We just found out today that Emily Carlson's leaving the Herald Review, so that's kind of a blow.
Oh, no. Shoot.
Where's she going?
Across.
Lacrosse.
Really.
Well, then-
Changes.
In any event, you look at all five, I mean, we've increased across the board on everything. If you just take a look at always, most of the time, whether they're larger percentage or small percentages, like Ben mentioned, the yellow's getting smaller, the green and the blues are getting bigger. So I think we're heading in the right direction for everything.
Agreed.
Is it,
I think David's point about communication is good. I mean,
oh yeah,
that probably should be, one of our big focus points.
well, especially this year, the end game that we're after.
Do we have challenges connecting with the radio stations or the TV stations communications? I mean, did they normally connect with you on that, or is Jessica kind of a?
I don't remember doing any more. I don't remember doing any more or less than we have a standing call after our board meetings with Kathy Lynn. One of the things that Julie and I changed recently was because those times are sort of established on my calendar, there's no wiggle room on it, 8:35, I gotta be there on the phone with Kathy or it doesn't happen. And what that inevitably ends up doing is creating a little bit of margin around it too. Like there's a time and that call, you've heard it takes 3 minutes. Well, all of a sudden I've got from 8:35 or 8:37 to 9 or 9. So we talked about and blocked off some time right after that really isn't occupied now to just talk about what from that board meeting last night can we push out and how should we push it out? So there's like some intentional time built into our calendars now to push that out. So
I think your observation is right on. I think it needs to be pushed out. I think, not to cast aspersions, but our media people they're just kind of waiting. They don't push us away, but they don't necessarily come out and create those invitations or create those interviews. They wait for something to drop in their inbox.
I also think that they have their own ideas of what is most important. And I think that we should be more proactive about what we think is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because the last title in the paper was the vape monitors. So.
it was interesting. I had a call with Todd Rapp and then met with him last Friday too. And he shared three messages, and these were, and I won't remember them, but there were three messages that I wrote down that he said, I can't remember if he said they were specific to our community or specific to communities in general, but I think they were real specific to ours, that they figured out during the previous election and referendum. And they had to do with our financial management, they had to do with staff, and they had to do with students. And so he talked about those being important messages, just to
What was the last one?
continue to drill on.
Students.
Oh, students.
Something to do with students to something to do with staff. I'll have to pull that up. I remember the last one was, we do what we say we're gonna do financially. We're good at managing, taxpayers' money, which I think we've done a good job of that at board meetings, hammering that,
Yeah,
board did what it said it was gonna do, the board did it.
I don't think there's ever been a meeting
Yeah.
that Pat's missed saying
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I think that's good. I mean, so I think that's one of the messages we can keep hammering on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think being more proactive and important.
Is there a way, Matt, that the board can be more supportive in this regard? And I think we just need to be hauled up short to do this work.
I think part of it could be, if you have margin or ability to create content. It could be writing a letter to the editor. It could be writing a press release that we push out. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities for that. I've never had a newspaper turn away a press release. And there's some formatting things, and that media specialist person that I met from Nashua talked about putting a media toolkit kind of together, which I think we could use, but because there's some specific technical aspects to some of that, but it could be polished and before it got pushed out. But if there's content to create, I shared in the Facebook Live today about the MSBA conference.
Mhm.
And it could be sharing your experience from that.
Mhm.
Letting the community know what we saw, what we learned, what sessions you went to, messages you took back. I think those are all good.
So I don't want to jump ahead, but I want to throw this out on the table. Thinking about November and thinking about we need the chamber and thinking about who the new chamber president is and where the new chamber president sits on our board here. I see it as a positive, but I see it as a concern in how we portray that to the community and our messaging on it. I think something needs to be,
Concern how, Pat?
well, a concern of, obviously, she's the new president, she sits on the board. Is it how people view that in the sense of, I truly believe we need the chamber to help us in
Absolutely.
this process as they helped us in the
Absolutely.
elementary referendum. It may have been overcautious, I don't know, but it might be, maybe it's a conversation with Todd and then you and Melissa sitting down and understanding roles and where they need to be so it doesn't get blurry for her or for us because of where she sits on both things. I see it as a positive, but just flipping the coin over, be proactive on it instead of be reactive to it. And if there's a way to shape and mold it to be on a proactive side so that we can respond without hesitation, if that makes sense.
I think I think the chamber wrote a letter on behalf of supporting the schools,
Yes.
but she could always recuse herself too from any of those votes or something. Just have to point that out.
However, I think it's important to have that conversation up front so everybody understands what each expectation is and coming down the pike. Because I think we know the group or groups, they'll throw whatever they can throw out there and position ourselves. That's beneficial to us.
So looking at the school board goals, to me, they seem pretty well aligned, but does anybody see anything that they would want to change based on the data we collected?
I did, you know, we could go through these bullet by bullet. I don't know that we need to right now, but we're making progress, I think, on almost every one of these items. I mentioned my meeting with Todd last week. He just sent me sort of an overview work plan today. Shared with Pat earlier, he's gonna be working in Thief River Falls too. So there's kind of a good northern connection, and he offices out of Moose Lake during referendum season a little bit, so that's convenient. I think he's gonna be up here the 9th or the 10th of February. So if you're on that referendum committee, I'll get you the specific date, but it might be a good opportunity to pull that group in with Todd.
So we talk about negotiations here. It says initiate by 4:30 of 2022. We're not going to try to start any of those. I understand the teachers, but I mean, and any of the other ones, we're not going to.
Yeah, I think that's good, Pat. I think there's a couple things related to that. I think we should change that date. Because we can start with anybody right now, the single contracts, and, you know, if the teachers can start earlier too if they agree to it. They just have to agree. And I don't know, I don't know that they will, because I think there's gonna be a desire to wait till the legislature's done. But even if we got language done, because, you know, there's always some of that stuff that you can probably get out of the way. So should we change that date?
Yep.
Let's change that date. I'd say January 31st, and we can put that there and have at least one individual's negotiation started by then.
Waltz's plan was pretty generous.
Yeah,
Has to get through the two, but
yep. It's interesting, I mean, he's got 4 and 2 in there, a bunch of money on the sped cross subsidy, tying it to inflation. Bunch of mental health components to it. Free food.
I think some of that's going to be a challenge for us as far as public perception.
Yeah.
The governor gave you everything in the world and now you want more.
Yeah. Yeah, I shared at our regional soups meeting that he has to quit saying we're gonna fully fund education. He doesn't have the ability to do that. There's just no way.
Yeah, and that's gonna be hard to explain.
Yeah,
It is.
Like we said before, last year or 2 years ago, 2% on the formula is $600,000. Our budget's $60 million. The math doesn't work. We can't give raises equal to the basic increase.
Well, Mark and I sat in on negotiations, and one thing that was driven home to us repeatedly was a dollar is not a dollar. A 2% increase is not a 2% salary increase. And at this table, we get that, but I think that's a message that needs to be broader, understood by a broader public.
Kathy Erickson, I told Kara this, she worked for ARC. She was a business manager for Duluth. She's the MDE finance commissioner now.
Oh,
And it was really refreshing. She came to our regional soups meeting Fridays ago. Well, she was at I invited her to Buca. She didn't come. She was looking for something to do for dinner. Anyway, it was refreshing at our soups meeting to have a commissioner of finance talk about education and children. Because Tom Melcher was brilliant, but he didn't talk about children outside of pupil units.
It was straight numbers guy.
He was just straight up and down numbers dude. And Kathy understands that everything we're doing ultimately comes down to some kind of an impact on a child and a family. So that was refreshing. And, but anyway, she said her rule of thumb is that it's about a factor of 3. And I don't care, you and I talked about this, or I mentioned this to you, and I'm curious what our experience would be. But if you got a 1% on the, if you got a 3% on the formula, that meant you could probably give 1% out in raises. That's about what that new money would mean.
But there needs to be a broader understanding of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's,
It's confusing to folks. And again, I think we have some members of our labor leadership that understand that. There's a giant chasm between what they understand and the rank and file.
Mhm.
One of the interesting things that was in the session David and I went through, the business manager that was in there said that she would price out options for both sides in a negotiation. And they had that trust level going to where the teachers would go to her and say, if we wanted
an extra vacation day.
an extra vacation day, what would that cost? And
We'll try it this year. I'll happily do it.
yeah,
I'll run your numbers for you.
Yeah.
We'll change that date on here.
Yep.
To January 31st.
We've done that in the past.
probably.
But, there's, one thing is to take a visual of just what steps are for all groups. And so you put that, you subtract that out from whatever percent is available. And then you can divvy up each group within that and say, this is what 1% is, this is what we got left to divvy up, in that piles.
Any other discussion here? Time to move on to district health insurance update.
So no handouts here, information, just kind of where we're at, timeline, that kind of thing. Pat sits on the Fringe Benefit Committee. The committee's has done a lot of good work. I mean, it's not been comfortable. The group decided this fall to pursue or investigate this high deductible option. Right now, the IRS minimum for a embedded deductible plan is a $3,000 deductible for a single and a $6,000 deductible for a family. So that's what the group sort of narrowed in on. In November, Jim Sherping and Katie Thunshell from the teachers group did presentations around the district on those. We got a whole pile of questions. We pushed out recently answers to those questions in a Google Doc for people to take a look at. The Fringe Committee, we at some point that we have to come to a head with something. And so some internal staff put together kind of a document for us to work off of at the Fringe Committee that lays out the situation that we're in, a recommendation to the board as far as plan design and then some recommendations or commentary on what things should be on the table at negotiations, knowing that those really they have to happen there. We had good discussion at our last meeting a couple weeks ago. Ideally, that group will approve that letter or a form of it. We have a meeting on Thursday this week. The teachers have had a number of meetings with admin insurance reps, which I think, to be honest with you, have worked in our favor. When I say our, I mean our district, all of us, right? Because the admin insurance reps aren't afraid of high deductible plans. They think they're good for employees in the right circumstances, so they're not, telling tales of woe to our folks. And I think we're in a unique position and a good position where admin represents a significant number of our employees with the ESPs and the teachers. And they have one field rep that's saying the same thing to everybody. And they got some specific feedback from their insurance attorney last week. The teachers met today to kind of discuss those things. None of the things they discussed are like showstoppers in terms of the plan design. There were a few things on the negotiation side that they're going to be requesting that I think will be a stretch. But that's really a negotiation piece. We've tried to get as much figured out outside of negotiations so we don't spend 100 meetings just talking about insurance because we can't afford to meet forever. The biggest, I think the two, I didn't hear anything about singles, which is good. The two biggest groups I think admin is interested in talking more about or negotiating a little bit more about are married employees. Currently married employees have a 100% ticket. No premium, no cost really other than copays, I suppose, and some deductible for pharmacy. What the Fringe Benefit Committee had discussed up until this point was, the generic more contribution from the district for family. So contributing half of the deductible, which is pretty common, I think. Their perspective is that that's a step backward for that married employee group. And so they're looking for a little bit more than $3,000 that a couple who didn't have both spouses working for the district would get. So that's one area. The second one, we had put together a concept where if the group that's affected are the people who would be retiring not this year, but retiring next year or the year after that really don't have time to build up a HSA account. It's kind of like when districts shifted from severance to 403B, and you had some people that they didn't have time to build up 403B and they didn't have severance either. So what we had kind of put out there for debate or discussion was transitioning people over 2 years. They're interested in transitioning over 5 years. Karen and I talked about that a little bit today. It only affects the people who are actually retiring, so it doesn't end up being a lot. Like this year, maximum for us, it would be 9. If this was a typical year, it'd be 9 people that would be impacted by this. And I don't see we're going to have piles of people in that spot. So I don't think that's going to cost us a lot of money, but it's going to be it would be a huge hang up for people, and it's not going to cost us a lot of money to put that out there. So those are the two groups that I think have the biggest concern. There were some questions about the network. I think those are going to get cleared up and people are going to come to grips with that. Mayo is still in our network. That's a big one that people worried about. Otherwise, our network stays the same. I think the ESP group is going to want to exchange having full single full pay single by the district in exchange for agreeing to this. And I think the teachers will kind of give some solidarity to that. So, but anyway, the idea would be that on Thursday, this fringe group would vote on that letter to recommend to you. And then on Monday, you'd consider that recommendation. And I think how that comes to you, or the language that you use at the table, will be important. I think the board is within its right to take action on the plan design that's recommended by the fringe committee, but I think it's probably going to be wise to, rather than approve or accept the recommendations on negotiations, to consider those, because we're in kind of a unique spot. If the board says, yep, you bet, we're in for all those things, all of a sudden we're not negotiating from that. We're not negotiating anymore. I think we want to be transparent, but also not give away everything, because some of that I'm not sure we could do. So assuming that happens on Monday, and the timing of that's important because we have some retirees that haven't given us their letter yet, because they're waiting to see what happens Monday.
What's the deadline for their,
February 1.
So if there's a motion, recommended motion, that Mark has that, or the board has that, so we don't.
Yeah, we'll get that ahead of time. The question that I posed to Joe from admin is, because at some point the union has to vote on this, because it is a decrease in the aggregate value of their insurance plan. There's no arguing it. It's clear. Everybody knows that. That was spelled out in the early versions of the fringe. When we rated this, it showed the decrease, but then that was verified by their attorneys too.
How much of a decrease, man?
It wasn't very much.
Like 2.05%.
Compared to what we're offering.
wow,
Yeah, so it doesn't end up being a huge difference in aggregate value because of that HSA contribution. But it is nonetheless, so they have to vote. There's a couple things I think we have to get clarification on. The law says that the exclusive representative of a certified bargaining unit, all of them need to vote. Well, I'm not clear on how many of those we have. And the teacher group obviously is, the ESP group obviously is. I'm not sure how many other of our bargaining groups qualify as a certified, exclusive representative, certified bargaining. I don't know that answer yet. Because the question is, kind of gets back to, well, what if the teachers say yes and the ESP say yes, but the secretaries say no, the directors say no? What kind of middle?
So there needs to be a majority in the affirmative, then, is what you're saying.
I'm saying I don't know.
If they fit in the group, if they fit in that mold of,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I think I'm getting clarification on that now. I think there's a way to read that, and if we're in a particular situation where I don't know the answer to, if the secretary said, nope, we don't want to do that, and everybody else did, where does that leave us? Now, I think there are some things we could do. We could rate their plan individually, which would, if it would really be motivating for them if we didn't have a percentage. If we had a flat dollar amount, it'd be very motivating. It's less motivating because if their premiums went up by 60%, because that's what that plan would cost, we're picking up 90% of that 60% increase. So it might not hit them quite the way it needs to. So a question is, how many certified bargaining groups do we have? Or how many of the groups we have are just organized in some way, or don't meet the definition of certified?
The question is, what is MSBA?
admin?
No, BMS.
BMS, yeah.
Yeah,
And my feeling is they all can go to mediation. you can go to mediation.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
but I'm not an attorney.
So that's a question. The second question is how this vote has to happen and if it really needs to be independent of the contract negotiations. I told Joe, I said, I don't know why it wouldn't, why it couldn't. And I said, from the district's perspective, I think it has to be part of contract negotiations because we aren't going to be in a position to bargain without knowing, like, if we bargained the contract without knowing the resolution to the insurance or vice versa, it would really, those things are just so connected. So,
We've been very consistent in saying that from day one, though.
Yeah.
We need to know.
so he was gonna check on that. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but it seems to me that contract negotiation or the contract tentative agreement, why it couldn't include the health insurance change and the other corresponding changes to the agreement all at once.
The healthcare is part of the contract.
Yeah.
So-
I just don't know on how you'd separate them.
So if it's 2 point whatever difference, what are options to make that 2 point whatever difference up so that there is no aggregate value change?
Increase the HSA contribution.
Because if there's no aggregate value change, the board can unilaterally make a change on health insurance.
True.
Hmm.
And there theoretically would be ways to make that up over time. I just don't know how much money it would be. Because the minimum deductible amount goes up. It used to be that 17, a few years ago, 1750 was the 6,000 used to be. So that number is ratcheted up either in leaps or small little ticks. It's usually like $50 or $100 a year. It goes up. And, a negotiating strategy that we'll hear and that they've brought up is that the district automatically increases its HSA contribution as that IRS established number goes up. So if we didn't have that'd be a way to kind of regain some ground over time.
So there are other options to make that 2 point whatever up in other areas? Thinking outside of the box.
I think it only relates, that percentage only relates to the health insurance. Is that what you're talking about? Like looking at life or long-term disability or
Just
just the
within
health?
within the box of the health insurance, is there anything within that boundaries that can be changed to make that 2 point, whatever that percentage is up? So that's equal aggregate value. Outside of the increase in contribution, is there something else within the plan that?
I believe if we were to pay more of the premiums, that would make a difference. So I don't know if us covering the ESPs 10% for singles would be enough to do it.
I only throw the question out on the table, something to think about. We can ask those questions outside of the box to,
A backup plan.
and I'll just, enough said. Gets ready.
I hear you. Okay.
So assuming everything goes perfectly, we'll have something to you Monday to consider for a vote. And then I think we can, kind of like we talked about earlier, we can talk to the groups about how soon they want to start negotiating, if they want to get things going early. Tentative agreements on particular items are contingent on the whole thing being approved, so, we can start
the
that.
message. Whatever the state gives us, it's not gonna get us out of the woods, right? And to me, that's the message that needs to be delivered to help us get to the table sooner.
Mhm.
And it's not as if we haven't been saying this for how many years. We're in a financial pickle.
Mhm.
We're in negotiations and here's what we can do or here's what we can do. Whether the state gives us 4 and 2, as Governor Walsh, or 4 or 5 and 5, what we're asking for, comes back down to what does that equate out? 3 to 1, you said? Well, if it's $3, we're going to give you $1. Well,
1.5.
yeah. So you know what I mean? It's how that upfront message is on why we want to get to the table, why we want to get them settled. Because regardless what the state does, it's not
Yeah.
really going to change our
Well, we can do
plan on how we enter negotiations.
If they tie some of those things to the inflation rate, that gives us a tool to kind of level a little bit over time. You
Right,
know,
it's not gonna happen
rather than
overnight.
waiting for, we haven't had anything for 5 years in that category. If some of those got tied to inflation, that would help us, but you're right, it doesn't get us out.
And the governor's proposal doesn't do that until 2026, the inflation connection.
So, 3 years out, right? And even then, it's still not gonna,
Matt, is your assessment, and I'm asking you to look into the tea leaves, but are the teachers group and the ESPs, certainly the people at the table have a much better understanding. Does the unit as a whole have a better understanding, or are we gonna run into a buzzsaw with that?
I think there are people that are entrenched that you couldn't convince that this is okay. I think there's there's a group of, I mean, if we put people on this continuum where you have this, what I think, the executive team and the negotiators who have been hearing the song and dance for a few years now and know that this can't continue. I mean, the field rep from admin vocally says something has to change. Like, he's telling his groups that this can't work anymore. So there's that group. And then I think on the other hand, you have this entrenched group, and then you have some kind of movable middle, and there are people that are receptive and willing to listen to people they respect. And, it's kind of dependent on who the influencers are. But I believe that the majority of teachers understand that something has to change and are willing to do it. The majority. That could be 54%, but I believe the majority are there. And I think a big part of that was helped by Katie and Jim being the ones out there talking. It wasn't the suit up there telling them to trust me and it'll be okay. It was their own people saying, this is how this goes. And now it wasn't like they were there saying, we got to do this. They were presenting information on something.
It's factual.
It was factual, yeah.
of course, it's something they didn't want to hear, or they didn't like hearing, but it's
Well,
factual.
we looked at that when we looked at a passing a levy. There's 20% that
Yep.
there is no way ever that
Yep.
you're going to convince them, ever.
Mhm.
And that's probably this similar scenario.
Yeah.
I would say it's evident, the ones that stepped out, Jim and Katie, I think they're feeling some heat from some of the 20%ers, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
Just as the negotiation team from 2 years ago felt the pressure and heat from their membership coming back to the table.
I think, it's difficult considering what happened with negotiations, and I look at the union president's in the middle of this. She gets it. She's pushing for it. Now, is she well respected across the group, or to what degree is she well respected and people are going to listen to her? I don't know. But you can go down the list, and Jim, I don't know about Jim, but I think Katie is respected. Melissa Ewan's back at the table. I think she's going to negotiate again, and she was at their last insurance kind of
Yeah.
look at meeting. Susie Drobnik was there. She's on the fringe benefit committee now. I think she carries a lot of weight in that middle school. So I think there are some key people that if they are on board, I mean, I don't know to what degree Brian has influence and with whom, but in the meeting we had in 135, he said, I get that we're never gonna be able to talk about the back page of the contract if we don't fix this. So how that translates into support and how that translates into votes and how that translates into them when they're in a different environment.
Mm.
It's one thing to say it in 135, it's another thing to say it at East Rapids Elementary.
But that's the dynamic of it. I mean, all we can do is put the facts out there, right?
Yep.
And how they interpret them.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. The other thing is, the board has the ability, I mean, and we'll have to jump off this bridge if it comes to it, but if the Fringe Benefit Committee won't pass anything at all Thursday, the board could still approve this plan design. And then we're gonna be sitting in negotiations trying to work out the details. The big setback is you don't have this committee's backing on it.
Right.
So that would be a big setback, but the board could and probably will need to, at least if the Fringe Committee says no or doesn't do anything, the board could still approve this change in plan design and with the understanding that we've got to negotiate the details. And if we can't hold the line, we can hold the line, but at least it's out there.
Personally, as one board member, I would like to have the recommendation blessed by the committee. I think that in itself carries weight across the groups, if you will, outside of us saying, we're gonna adopt this. Well, saying, the board did it.
Yep.
Took it right out of our hands. So we did all that work for nothing and the board went ahead and did what they were gonna do.
And they're taking our money away.
Right. So I mean, it to me, it puts a negative tone on it.
Yep, agreed.
From this day kind of going forward when we.
If we can keep the attitude, we're doing this together.
Right, exactly, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
that's been the goal.
we value the committee work, right? That's why the committee is there and certainly don't want to go around it.
Well, we've been very consistent in doing this together. This isn't an us versus them. This is a we have to figure this problem out. And we've been very consistent in that understanding.
I think one of the things that could be interesting on Thursday, and Karen and I had this kind of on our desk today a little bit, or in conversation. It's likely we're gonna have some people on that Fringe Committee. Again, they've been immersed in it. So there's kind of like two ways to look at your role on that Fringe Committee. One of them is, I'm here as a delegate, I'm here, this is a republic, and my job is to vote the way that my constituents want me to vote. Another way is to look at it and say, I'm the one that's been at all these meetings and educated myself. And I'm gonna make the best decision I can for my group and the district. Those are two different and potentially opposing positions, and we're gonna have some people out on that table that are in that spot.
How many people are on the Fringe Benefits Committee?
Oh, I don't know, 20? Is it 20? I don't know, 15.
That's a big.
Somewhere
committee.
between 11 and
Between
20.
11 and 20. Yeah, I think it's about a dozen.
And do they have to make a majority opinion vote?
I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection was the consensus of the committee is to move this forward. Or was it majority vote?
Well, what's the consensus? It's not unanimous.
Well, I understand that, but. to
I
me,
think
it's-
it'll come to a vote on Thursday.
Well, I think it needs to come to
Yeah.
a vote on Thursday. Well, so-and-so wasn't there, so they weren't part of the consensus for, against, you know, so.
Mhm.
I'm looking it up. It just says agreement or
There's-
harmony.
13 voting members.
13.
It's gonna be interesting. And the dynamic, you know, we have people, at least two members on that committee, I think that are retiring. they don't have any skin in the game personally. So they could either do what they think's right or stick it to somebody or, I don't know. I don't know how they're gonna go.
Yeah, you never know. What time is this at?
Four.
45,
Four. It's, without being overly dramatic, it's one of the most significant kind of meetings, votes that's happened here in a long time. I mean, we're talking about changing health insurance away from this plan that's been revered to something that people are nervous about. And I won't say worse, but just something that people are nervous about. I believe it's going to be better for 90% of our employees.
It certainly creates a better opportunity for the ESPs to have insurance at a less cost to them personally.
Mhm.
Again, it's all in the eyes of the beholder, right? They're taking something away from me, somebody's eyes, or
Right.
boy, this creates an opportunity for me and my family and I to have health insurance.
I brought that up at the last ESP LMC meeting, that this proposal would make health insurance more affordable for more members of that group. I don't know,
I think people heard that.
it's coming from the superintendent, so
Yeah, I
the
think
grain
people
of salt's about this big, but, but yeah, it should matter.
The other dynamic is, this is me in my opinion, and just based on where I came from in the county, is that we've got 600 plus employees. The message starts here. By the time it gets out to here, it really gets watered down, and what's factual and what isn't factual, and how that message is carried out. Sure, they represented the delegates around the table that represent all the groups. I had this conversation of, well, how is the message getting carried back to the respective group? Is it in a positive way or is it in a negative way? So again, the further out the ripple goes, I would just say the less accurate the information is. And will people reach out and ask for themselves, ask the question to somebody that they trust and have confidence in to get a true answer? Yeah, if it's at 20-25%. See, I told you. See?
When I signed on in 1988, this was the deal.
Yeah, it's that middle ground is where we're trying to
Yeah.
get to the one side.
More to come.
Any further discussion?
Thanks for that update.
It's one of the most complicated leadership kind of issues I've ever been involved with, without question. The dynamics are just amazing.
Sounds like an opportunity to excel.
Indeed.
Change is always an opportunity. It's just right how people view it. And then it's the fear of the unknown, because if I know what I got now, that's the new stuff. Whatever that new stuff is, how's it going to affect me? Not necessarily us, but me in a negative way.
No items under partnerships. Is there any other business before the board? Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the question is that is they can come up with some change the aggregate bid